In the arid lands of a Middle Eastern kingdom, where golden dunes stretched as far as the eye could see, and the desert heat tested the endurance of any traveler, there stood a magnificent palace that shone like a jewel under the relentless sun. There lived Princess Amira, a 25-year-old whose dark eyes held a sadness that no luxury could disguise. Amira was the only daughter of Sultan Rashid, a powerful and inflexible man who ruled his kingdom with an iron fist. From a young age, she learned that there were absolute rules that could never be questioned. Obedience was a virtue. Questioning was weakness. And certain things were simply forbidden without need for explanation. The princess grew up surrounded by imported silks, rare perfumes, and sumptuous banquets. But behind all that opulence, she felt suffocated. It was like living in a gilded cage where everything was beautiful, but nothing was free. Her days were filled with etiquette, music, and poetry lessons approved by the advisors. Her nights were devoid of any real purpose. One day, while strolling through the palace gardens, Amira heard shouts coming from the main gates. Curious, she approached and saw the guards dragging an elderly, frail-looking man. He was a foreign Christian who had been captured trying to enter the kingdom. With him, the guards found forbidden books. The Sultan ordered the man arrested and all his belongings burned immediately. Amira watched from afar as the guards piled the books onto a bonfire. But something fell from the pile unnoticed. A small book with a worn brown cover rolled under a nearby rose bush. As night fell and everyone retired, Amira went silently down to the garden. Her heart pounded as she searched for the book under the starlight. She found it covered in dust among the thorns of the rose bush. With trembling hands, she wiped the cover and read Genesis. Back in her room, she locked the door and lit a lamp. She opened the book with a mixture of fear and fascination. The first words she read took her breath away. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Amira had never read anything like it. The words were poetic, powerful, full of majesty. She continued reading about how God spoke and light emerged from darkness, how he parted the waters and formed dry land, how he created the sun, the moon, and the stars. Each page transported her to a world of beauty and divine order that she had never imagined. But it was the story of the creation of man that truly touched her heart. God formed man from the dust of the earth and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. God created humankind in his own image. Amira stopped reading and let this truth sink into her soul. If this was true, then every person had inherent value, divine dignity. It didn't matter their position, wealth, or power. In the following weeks, Amira devoured every word of that book. She wept as she read about Adam and Eve in the garden, about temptation and the fall, about how sin entered the world. She felt a pang in her chest as she read about Cain and Abel, about how envy and pride can destroy even siblings. And when she reached the story of Noah, about how God saved a righteous man and his family from the flood, she understood something profound about grace and mercy. The story of Abraham deeply impressed her. A man who left everything to follow God's voice, trusting in promises that seemed impossible. And when she read about the near sacrifice of Isaac, how God provided a ram at the last moment, Amira felt that something greater was being revealed there, something about sacrifice and redemption that she didn't yet fully understand. But it was the story of Joseph that truly transformed her heart. A young man sold into slavery by his own brothers, falsely accused, thrown into prison, forgotten and abandoned. Yet he remained faithful to God through it all. And in the end, God exalted him to save not only his family, but an entire nation. Joseph's last words to his brothers echoed in Amira's mind. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. That lonely and empty princess began to change. She began to see the palace servants not as inferiors, but as people created in the image of God, worthy of respect and love. She began to pray to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, feeling for the first time a personal connection with the divine that transcended empty rituals. Amira began secretly visiting the poor beyond the palace walls. She brought them food, medicine, and most importantly, hope. She told them stories from Genesis about how God saw each person, loved every soul. Her presence brought light to dark places, and people began to call her the Princess of Hope. But secrets have a short life in palaces. An envious servant, who had long coveted Amira's position, discovered the book hidden under the princess's mattress. Terrified and seeing an opportunity to gain favor, she ran straight to the Sultan. Rashid's fury was terrible. He stormed into his daughter's room like a tornado, snatching the book from its hiding place and throwing it to the floor. "You have betrayed everything we are," he shouted, his face red with rage. "You have dishonored our family, our faith, our kingdom." Amira remained calm, though her heart was racing. "Father, I have found something that gives meaning to my life. I have found a God who loves unconditionally, who sees value in every person." "Silence," thundered the Sultan. "You will be judged by the laws of the kingdom, and you know what the penalty is for apostasy." Amira was dragged into the deepest dungeons of the palace. The cell was cold, damp, and dark. Rats scurried in the corners. The smell of mold and despair permeated the air. There, chained to the stone wall, she had only her thoughts and her memories of those sacred stories. The days dragged on. Amira lost count of how long she spent there. She received only water and a piece of stale bread once a day. Her body weakened, but strangely, her spirit grew stronger. She prayed constantly, reciting from memory the verses she had memorized. She thought of Joseph in prison, of how he remained faithful even when all seemed lost. Finally, the day of judgment arrived. Amira was dragged into the great throne room, where her father sat on his high seat, surrounded by the kingdom's religious advisors and judges. She could barely stand, so weak was she. The charges were read aloud: possession of prohibited Christian literature, abandonment of the faith of their ancestors, dissemination of foreign teachings among the people. Each crime was serious. Together, they meant only one thing: public execution. The presiding judge looked at Amira with disdain. "Do you have anything to say before your sentence is pronounced?" Amira lifted her head, gathering her last strength. Her voice was weak, but firm. "I read about a God who created all things with love. A God who sees value in every person, rich or poor, powerful or weak. I learned about imperfect men and women whom God used to fulfill His purposes. And I discovered that there is more to life than power and tradition. There is love, there is purpose, there is hope." The Sultan punched the arm of his throne. "Blasphemy. The sentence is death. It will be carried out at dawn tomorrow." Amira was taken back to her cell. That would be her last night on earth. Strangely, she felt no fear. She felt peace. She had found something worth dying for. She knelt on the cold floor of her cell and began to pray. "God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob," she whispered, "I don't know if I deserve your attention, but I know that you are a God of miracles. You parted the Red Sea. You provided a ram in place of Isaac. You freed Joseph from prison. If it is your will, free me too. But if not, this gives me courage to face what is to come." The hours passed slowly. Amira dozed off briefly, exhausted. And then, something extraordinary happened. A bright light filled the cell, so intense that Amira had to cover her eyes. She initially thought it was a guard's torch, but the light was different. It was warm, peaceful, otherworldly. And in the midst of the light, she saw a figure. He was a man dressed in white, with eyes full of infinite compassion. He approached her, and Amira felt as if she were in the presence of something holy, something pure beyond all comprehension. "Fear not, Amira," said the figure in a voice that was both gentle and powerful. "I have heard your prayers. Who are you?" whispered Amira, trembling. I am the one about whom it is written in Genesis. I am the seed of the woman who would crush the serpent's head. I am the lamb that God provided in place of Isaac. I am the one whom Joseph foreshadowed betrayed by my brothers, but exalted to save many. My name is Jesus. Amira fell face down on the ground. Lord, she cried, I read about you in the prophecies, but how can you be here? Jesus reached out his hand and touched his head. I am always with those who seek me. You have read about creation in Genesis, but I was there. By the word all things were made. You have read about the sin that entered the world, but I came to undo what the fall caused. You have read about the sacrifices, but I am the ultimate sacrifice. He touched the chains on her wrists and they fell with a metallic sound. Rise, my daughter. I have a purpose for your life, but my father ordered my death, Amira said. How can I escape? Jesus smiled. I have changed the hearts of pharaohs and kings. Do you think a sultan is beyond my reach? The light intensified even more, and then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. Amira was alone again in the dark cell, but something had changed. The chains were on the floor, and in her hands, miraculously, was the book of Genesis that had been confiscated. But now there was something more, additional pages she hadn't seen before, telling of the fulfillment of the promises of the Messiah who was to come. When the guards came to fetch her at dawn, they found Amira standing strong, with the book open in her hands and an otherworldly glow on her face. She no longer looked like the weak and broken woman of the previous night. The guards were so frightened that they retreated. One of them ran to warn the Sultan. Quickly, the news spread throughout the palace. The princess was free from her chains. There was light in her cell. She seemed transformed. The Sultan came personally to the dungeons, accompanied by his advisors. When he saw his daughter standing there, radiant, with the book he had ordered destroyed, his face paled. How is this possible? He whispered. The chains... The book? What kind of witchcraft is this? Amira looked directly into her father's eyes. It's not witchcraft, Father. It's the power of the living God, the God who created all things, the God who sent his Son to save us. He visited me tonight. One of the counselors shouted that she was delirious, but another, an old and wise man, approached the cell. He looked at the broken chains on the floor, at the book in her hands, at the light that still seemed to emanate from her. My lord, the advisor said to the Sultan, I have read in the ancient texts about the God of the Hebrews, the God who performed great miracles. If this is his power, who are we to fight against him? The Sultan was torn apart. His faith, his traditions, everything told him to carry out the sentence. But looking at his daughter, seeing the transformation in her, witnessing the inexplicable, something within him wavered. Amira stepped forward. Father, she said softly, I love you. I always will. But I have found something greater than any earthly kingdom. I have found a love that never fails, a hope that never disappoints. And this God has shown me that he can transform evil into good, just as he did with Joseph. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was tense, heavy. Then, surprisingly, the Sultan turned to his guards. Release her, he said abruptly. This... This is beyond my understanding. I will not execute my daughter for something that clearly involves forces I do not comprehend. The advisors protested vehemently, but the Sultan raised his hand. I have decided. She will be exiled, not killed. She will leave this kingdom, but with her life. In the following days, as Amira prepared for her departure, something remarkable happened. People she had helped, who had heard the stories from Genesis, began to appear at the palace. Not just one or two, but dozens. They told stories of how those words had changed their lives, brought hope, healed broken hearts. The Sultan watched all this with increasingly troubled eyes. He saw the impact his daughter had made. And although he couldn't admit it publicly, something inside him began to soften. When Amira finally left the palace, she did not go alone. Many chose to go with her, forming a caravan of people who had been touched by the same truth. They traveled to distant lands where they could live their faith freely. But the story didn't end there. Sultan Rashid secretly kept a copy of the scriptures his daughter had left behind. Late at night, when no one could see him, he would read them, grappling with the truths he found there. Years later, already old and near death, he sent a message to Amira. She returned and found her father transformed. He had secretly embraced her faith, touched by the same grace that had transformed his daughter. "I saw the power of the God you serve," he confessed on his deathbed. "I saw how he protected you, how he changed hearts, how he brought good out of what I intended as evil. Forgive me, my daughter, for almost taking your life." Amira held her father's hand, tears streaming down her face. "Jesus has already forgiven you, Father, just as Joseph forgave his brothers." This parable teaches us that the God who created the heavens and the earth still works miracles today. It shows us that no situation is beyond his reach. No heart is too hard to be softened by his love. And it reminds us that what the enemy intends for evil, God can transform into good, fulfilling his eternal purposes even through the most difficult circumstances.